let me draw this out. I have my... I don't think this is college rule. Whatever. I don't know why I'm doing it in a Sharpie. Actually, you should be doing this.
Okay.
Probably. Okay, you have now. That's going to be illustrated with a plus. We're going to say... you should be doing this, and I do it. We're going to say 3,000 years ago. Boop. That's a minus 3,000. That's right. That's when deep time ends.
That's how I've read that it kind of ends when you can actually have written history that can kind of take over.
Okay. The rest of that time, we're talking about deep time. Talk about that deep time. And that's a pretty long way to go. Okay, so let's put some shit in perspective. I'm gonna let you use a pen, and as you want to draw these different dates or whatever, these different fields, you can do it. We can keep on talking, but just use that as a notation. That way, it's not just information that's like out in space. For people that can listen, the people that listen and they learn that way, I'm sure all of this makes sense. For me, he could be slapping me in the face, and that's about how much sticks. That's why I have to repeat everything. So, I'm a visual kind of guy. All right. Continue.
Oh,
the Mediterranean basin.
The entire Mediterranean basin evaporated because it was now internal drainage.
I'm assuming that this took a while.
Yeah, it took a while, and it was probably dried for hundreds of thousands of years before that period ended.
And humans were around.
Apes. We had not really diverged. There were probably some early humans around that were going their own separate evolutionary path, but they probably look.
They look like monkeys. Or apes.
They would look like we are apes. Just to be pedant, to be correct, we are actually apes.
Okay, so we're apes.
But they would look more like the other living great apes. They would resemble one of them much more than they would us. Okay,
so 10 million to 6 million years ago. I like that. Because 6 to 10 million makes, for some reason that's backwards in my mind. 10 million to 6 million years ago ish is when we, as apes, diverged from chimpanzees.
Yeah, and unfortunately, that whole period of time is not as well known as later periods or earlier periods in human evolution because we don't have as good of a fossil record, and it's also
why is that?
During that time. Part of the explanation is quite likely because we were living in forests and we were living in areas that just aren't as good at producing fossils. And so when you when you're inhabiting an area where it's far less likely that you'll be fossilized if you die, unfortunately, it's less likely that your hairless ancestors will dig you up and stick you in a museum.
As we do.
Yeah.
Okay, 2 million. This is what's the Mediterranean?
Probably around 5 or to 10.
Oh, 5 to 10.
Yeah.
Okay. Boom, boom. Okay, so during that time when we were diverging from chimps, when apes were diverging from chimps, what is that called? The Mediterranean dry out.
Well, I know there's actually during that time it would be called the Pliocene or the Miocene epoch.
What was the Mediterranean?
The Messinian salinity crisis.
Okay. The Messinian
salinity crisis.
Salinity crisis.
It did more than just evaporate the Mediterranean Sea because what would happen is all of the salt that was
hence the salinity, right?
Yeah, in the water was not returned to the rest of the ocean.
Right.
But the water was.
Interesting.
And so as a result, the ocean actually became slightly fresher.
Whoa.
Because the salt was trapped at the bottom of whatever hellish landscape was left after all that water was evaporated. And as a result, and I've read some research, I don't know how solid it is, but it kind of makes sense. Because the rest of the ocean got fresher, it became easier for it to freeze.
Interesting. Now, would this lend to the Ice Age, or it wouldn't?
Okay, the Ice Age. This
does go into gaming and world building, by the way. But first, talk about the Ice Age.
The modern Ice Age, where began probably around 2 to 3 million years ago, and that's when the Earth started experiencing a series of cycles of what's known as glacial periods, where you had massive glaciers that would advance far, far away from the where they are now.
Like down to Mexico style?
No, not Mexico, more like Ohio.
Ohio, right.
That's the most recent one.
Okay.
And then you would have these periods of, interglacials, and that's what we're in one now, where the ice ages or the actual ice sheets would retreat, and they would be confined to the polar areas. Mm. Now, this is kind of a culmination of a much longer cooling period that occurred after the end of what's known as the Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum, which occurred around 55 million years ago.
Okay.
Yeah. So around that time, you had an area like Greenland or the northern part of Alaska experiencing a climate that was probably warmer than what we actually experience here in Kentucky. Probably more like Atlanta.
Really?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. It was probably the warmest that the Earth has ever been in the last 250 million years. It caused all sorts of interesting effects. You had plant species which had developed in the in Asia and North America march north, and then when they got close enough to where they could disperse around the poles, after it ended, they were mixed with each other and were forced south, and they had more or less spread across these continents that they normally couldn't.
Now you're talking about plants.
Talking about plants.
This
yes.
means it takes a long time.
It takes a long time.
And what is this period called? It's 55 million years ago?
Yeah, it's the beginning of what's known as the Eocene period.
Okay. Why is it called Eocene?
That I couldn't tell you.
It's just a fucking word.
There is an explanation. I just don't know it.
Okay. So this is a big fucking history lesson, right? Due to Daniel. And that's awesome. The interesting thing here, though, is you can talk about why these things... cough drop. You can talk about why these things are happening, right?
Yes.
In general, why-ish do things like this happen? Other than the fact that one thing happens, so obviously something else happens. Like, what's sort of a determining factor of this? Is there an easy answer?
Is there an easy answer? No, probably not one that I'm qualified to tell you. On really long periods of time, Earth's climate tends to alternate between what's known as hothouse and icehouse conditions.
When you say really long, you're talking about
tens of millions of years.
Tens of millions of years. Okay.
Yeah.
So it's happened a lot.
Yeah.
Because we're around for 4 billion years.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So from 55 million years ago up until around 2 million years ago, there was a general cooling, and you saw
This is the Eocene period.
Yes, and what I'm getting to now is something is a game-related world building question. At the time of the Eocene period, like I said earlier, South America was connected to Antarctica, and Antarctica was kind of connected to Australia, but that's another discussion.
Okay.
Antarctica and the other, and of course, in the areas in the Arctic, had a type of biome that we don't have today. It has been completely erased. Define
biome, please.
Biome is, say, a savanna, temperate forest, rainforest, mountain area.
Cool.
These are just general climatic types. They might have different sets of fauna and flora inhabiting them and on different continents, but climatically they're similar. Mm-hmm. Anyways, Antarctica, because it was so warm, it had no ice sheets, but it had what's known as polar forest, a true polar forest.
It's a forest at a pole.
Yeah, it is a forest at a pole, and these were forests that were experiencing 6 months of continuous daylight and 6 months of continuous darkness.
That's going to be a big old forest.
Yeah.
It's like the actual vampire, like 100 Days of Night. You know what I'm saying? But like fucking prehistoric shit.
So the plants that were actually in this biome, there's nothing like it today. There's absolutely nothing like it today, and we would probably know a lot more about it if the main area, Antarctica, wasn't covered in a mile of ice. That kind of makes things difficult in terms of. Although we have some, but just not nearly as much as we.
Are you talking about like big leafy shit that really tall trees or what?
Yeah. I'm not exactly sure how plants adapted, but they would have 24 hours of constant daylight and then 24 hours of darkness. The animals would also be stuck with this as well. And we do know from some of the animals, I think there were certain dinosaurs going further back that tended to be night adapted. They had like larger eyes, and it was clear that they were spending some time in total darkness, and it would make sense given the type of climate that they were dealing with.